And that is the question of this year. We have a interesting setup of Yom Tif. As you know, Yom Tif is Thursday night, Friday, and then Friday night Shabbos. So the question is, when should I light my Yizkor candle this year? When one has to light the Yizkor candle, when is the appropriate time to light it, and how should it be lit in a halakhically preferred manner?
Okay, I think we're starting off the questions in a sense going round robin. So I'll try to address this issue. This question it's very interesting because well, in Eretz Yisrael it doesn't apply. I can tell I just spoke with someone this afternoon very quickly that my grandparents' Yorzites were very well. We always remember that my grandfather was on Purim, and my grandmother's was on Shavuos. When my mother made Aliyah, so that all changed because she lived in Yerushalayim. So the Yortzeit was no longer on Purim because Purim in Yerushalayim was the 15th, not the 14th, and she only now one day. So instead of being Zion Sivan, which is the Yortzeit itself, there was no Shavuos. So in Eretz Yisrael, of course, it's only one day. So in Eretz Yisrael, this question is a moot point in a sense, because you could light it before Yom Tif on Thursday evening. The question is really a Chutz La'aretz question when we have 2 days. The reason it's a question is even though we all know that we could light candles, we could be mishtamesh, we could use fire on Yom Tif. That has to be typically l'tzorech, number one, either ochel nefesh. It has to be something for food-related purposes, or at least a hanoah, some type of great benefit, whether to see or for warmth. But the Yortzeit candle is questionable of what it actually falls under, and according to some, it could be problematic as to what is the function of it. The most lenient opinion is, I'll start with that, is to say that you could light a Yortzeit candle because it creates a menuchas nefesh. It gives a satisfaction of the soul to, number one, of course, to the neshama of the person who are lighting it for, but really for the person, the family member here who's lighting it and feeling we're doing something for their honor. So there is room to be makel to light it at that point. Of course, remember, this year you have to light it before your Shabbos candles, because once you light the Shabbos candles Friday night, then it's Shabbos already, then you can't light again. Unlike the question could be if there would be a 2-day Yom Tov during the week, when, of course, if you didn't light it, you don't light it necessarily on the candles time, you can light it afterwards when it is the actual second day. But if a person, so therefore we have to light it even the day before for that purpose. For that reason, some people, in order to get benefit out of it, some people, sometimes people put it in a corner on a shelf by the window. I recommend that if you're going to use it, if you're going to light it on Yom Tov, so put it on your table where you eat, and put it when you're going to have your other candles, the Yortzeit candle that you're going to light. So you do get a benefit out of it, and you have in mind, I'm getting benefit of it as well. If you can, I don't know if I have it. I don't remember last Yom Tov I had this candle from someplace. I think I might have gotten it in the New York area, but for this reason, so the Jewish companies who think of everything and anything under the sun, we know that Rahman al-Itzlan, when someone sits Shiva, we have what's called a 7-day candle. So 7 days. So they made a 2-day candle. It's a larger candle, and basically you light it Erev Yom Tov, and there's nothing wrong with lighting it on Erev Yom Tov, and it lasts all the way through the 2 days. If you want, they have these candles that they are available. They're not called Yortzeit candles. We can make it into a Yortzeit candle maybe if you have a larger one. So that would be what I recommend. Again, if you feel that you want to light it earlier, but again, there is room to be makel to light it and to derive benefit from it. But again, this year, one must light it before Shabbos candles. Keep that in mind.
Okay, so thank you, Rabbi Bukopolsky. Moving on, another Shavuos classic. We know that when it comes to Shavuos, very often there are two conflicting ideas. We have the classic idea of Simchas Yom Tif, of celebrating the Yom Tif with basar and yayin with meat, yet we know Shavuos, there is a custom, a practice to eat dairy food. So how do we balance, and what is the preferred way to fulfill both the din of Simchas Yontif, of rejoicing in the Yontif, and the practice, the custom of eating dairy on Shavuos?
To some rabbis, this is a no-brainer, but I'll let Rabbi
You
Vogel
eat a lot of both. You eat a lot of both.
This is a classic, as Rabbi Yetzger said. This is a classic Shavuos conundrum, because what the custom in Klal Yisrael is seemed to have become, and what the reality of halacha seems to be, don't seem to be in concert with each other. It's if one looks at the halacha, it appears that on Yontif, like every Yontif, there's an obligation of eating basar and yayin. There's an obligation of meat and wine, and that the way that we show Simchas Yontif is through eating important foods, through eating sudos, and sudos are generally made of meat. We know that originally it was because of the meat and the wine of libations and the meat of sacrifices, and even without the temple. So then that is still considered the way that we show our respect and our joy and our kavod as part of the joy of the Yontif. Now, there is an issue on Shavuos to eat ma'achale chalav, to eat dairy foods. And there are many, many reasons that are brought down the gematria of chalav, because when we were standing at Mount Sinai, we were given also the laws of kashrus. When we came away from the mountain, we had nothing to eat because we had to shecht, we had to prepare, and we had nothing to prepare. We weren't ready yet for that, so we had to eat what was in front of us. And what was in front of us was ma'achale chalav, was foods of dairy. And to remember that there's many, 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 many reasons that are brought, almost as many as the famous question on Hanukkah of, what was the miracle of 8 days? There's many, many, many reasons. And sometimes you feel like, they're hunting for reasons for why to sort of justify the minhag. At the end of the day, what many people will do is that they will dedicate one meal as a milchik meal, as a dairy meal. What many people do is that they use this as the pizza holiday, right? So, every meal is dedicated to milchiks. I'm not sure that that's in fact the way that is meant to be. I see Rabbi Polsky is putting hands down. I'm with him. That's not the appropriate way of celebrating the holiday and of giving the proper kavod and honor to the Yontif. What many people will do is that they will eat fleshig meals. In other words, it's a regular Yontif. You eat fleshig meals on Yontif. Sometimes perhaps a fish meal, which is also considered, according to some, considered chashuv. And then have like a kiddush when you come home from shul, on Yontif morning. So then to have some milchiks in order to be mekayim, to be able to fulfill this custom of ma'achale chalav. It doesn't say anywhere that you have to have meals of milchiks. It says that we have a custom of eating ma'achale chalav, foods of dairy. My personal suggestion is that that the meals should be regular Yontif meals, as one would eat normally on Yontif. And if one would have one fish meal on Yontif, a lighter meal because of the whole Yontif, so then that's fine. But that the meals should be exactly the way they are on Yontif. And that when one makes kiddush after staying up all night, or after learning, or after davening in the morning on first day, if you don't stay up all night, that one makes kiddush. One should make kiddush on milchiks. And have some milchik food, and in that way fulfill the custom of having milchiks on Shavuos. Fulfilling the obligation of basar, of meat and yayin, of giving kavod to Yontif, is a greater obligation than fulfilling the custom of having milchiks on Shavuos.
And to add on to what Rabbi Wogelanter is saying, is the Rabbi Wogelanter suggestion is, and what seems to be the consensus of all the rabbis, is exactly what Rav Moshe Isserles did back in Krakow in the beginning to mid 16th century. Is that it's exactly what he did, that he would first have dairy to fulfill the custom, and then he would clean up, wash out his mouth, and then he'd have a normal fleshik seudah.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, again, before we shift gears in the nature of the questions very much, I just wanted to go back. When it came to the question that Rabbi Reich introduced about, the question of, do rabbis ever get into a rut or, in trouble with their learning? I misread, and in truth, it was a question that was posed to all of the Rabbanim to hear the various perspectives. So we're just going to, before we shift gears, again, we'll see the questions are going to change in nature very much, but just to hear from the other Rabbanim, again, do you ever get into a rut or trouble in your learning? If so, what advice can you give to a Balabayas who faces this challenge more often than not? I will tell you that I actually received a text message today from a Balabayas who had this exact question. I told him, I hope you're going to tune in tonight because it's going to be discussed, but it's a question that comes up, again, more often than not, and we'd love to hear the perspectives of all the Rabbanim.
Okay. So I'll throw in my 2 cents into this. So I think I was once at a rabbinical conference, and this question was thrown around, and many of the rabbis were wondering what to do with their own learning. And my suggestion was that if you teach, so then that is what we call a great mechayev. That is a great obligator, and it puts a person in a position that they have to prepare, they have to be ready, and they have to constantly be on. Every person here has something that they could teach to someone, that they could learn with somebody who knows less, and that energizes a person. It energizes your learning. It energizes your involvement in it, your engagement in it, and that's, I think, that's one small part of the answer. Another part of the answer is how to energize your learning is you have to either learn with a chavrusa that you are obligated to. In other words, a chavrusa, a study partner that you wouldn't just say, listen, I don't think I'm going to make it tonight, and feel good about that. That you've obligated yourself, you've committed yourself to learn with that person, and that in itself gives it energy. That even on days when you're not feeling so great, you know what, you have an obligation to this other person. And the other way to do that is by committing yourself to a shiur, by committing yourself to going to a class and saying that this is what I go to. I go to this particular class, I go at this time, and therefore whether I'm feeling it or not feeling it doesn't really make a difference because I have a commitment to this. And I know that if I don't show up at the class, somebody else is perhaps not going to show up at the class, and they're going to learn from me. So you know what? I have an obligation. I have nothing more than a commitment. I'm not feeling great. I'm not feeling really into it. I'm not really in the mood to learn. It doesn't make a difference. I have a commitment to do that. And that commitment to learning is something that often pushes us over the humps. There are all other kinds of answers that are given in yeshivas. They tell bachrim to learn things that are interesting to them, learn things that they're interested in, and that'll keep them going. I don't know if that's the road that we have to go down. I think it's very, very simple. Very simple is commit yourself to something. Commit yourself to another person, to learn with them, to teach them, or to study with somebody else that you committed to them. Commit yourself to a class so that you know that you have a responsibility, you have an achrayas. When the Torah was given to us, so when God gave us the Torah, He gave us the Torah, we said Na'aseh v'nishma, then He pulled up the mountain and He held it over our heads. All the commentaries ask, why did God have to hold the mountain over our heads and say that if you take the Torah, good, and if not, sham tehei kfuraschem, and if not, this is where your burial place is going to be. Yeah, I need to be threatened. I just said Na'aseh v'nishma. I just said I'll do and I'll listen. I'm ready to take the Torah. What do you have to hold the mountain over my head for? Because there has to be, and when it comes to Torah, it's not only, oh, I love this, it's so beautiful, it's wonderful. That's what gets us over the first 3 minutes. But then there has to be a sense of kaf aleim hakagigis, a sense of responsibility. I have a responsibility here. And when you feel that sense of responsibility, very often that's the energy that pushes you over the top.
I just want to, not for the sake of machlokas, chas v'shalom, but just to, I think that personally, that learning something that may be different, that, just a lighter topic, I think that especially in the difficult times, I know the B'nai Yeshivas, many of the Yeshivas that couldn't go back to learning during this time after Pesach, when they're learning typically the more involved Gemaras of Yavamis and Baba Kama and so on, which would be more difficult. So they went, they're learning brachas, again, brachas are gavaldik masechta, but it's something that's lighter, it's just different. And I think sometimes people could use a break. I think that's something that works. I think for me personally, just being out of the routine, even though we tried, giving classes and everything like that, but I think we're trying to figure out how to motivate ourselves. And for me, I probably listened to more shiurim and more speakers during these last 2 months that I have in the last 20 years. I usually don't get an opportunity to hear so many classes in shiurim. And when you hear some of the Gedolim speak about the importance of learning, and I feel myself as the student and as the Rebbe, and it gives me that chizuk, it gives me that encouragement, to get back on the saddle, to get back into the role, into the model itself. And finally, as Rabbi Woglanther mentioned also, is of course to have a chavrusa, and but also to teach someone. We say every day in Avarabba, it should be lishmar v'lasus v'lamed, lishmar v'lasus v'kamis kol du'i Talmud Torah secha. Sometimes you're learning about something, learn about it in a different way. So if I'm learning the laws of tefillin, the laws of learning of tzitzis, I'm learning a Gemara about something, about brachas, if I'm learning about something, go into the agricultural side of the food, for example. Go.
There are people here, man. There are a lot of people.
I know there are a lot of people. You have to mute yourself. So there are, you have to just figure out a different side of that particular learning and have an appreciation from a different thing. And then again, it's just temporary. Realize that it's only temporary, and that eventually you'll get back to the learning that you want to do itself. One last thing I'll say, as I mentioned about learning b'chavrusa, also set a goal for yourself. If I have a goal, I want to finish a certain thing by a certain time, put that pressure on myself to say, well, I gotta divide it by X amount of things. I gotta finish it by that time.
If I could just add one more thing. One of the reasons I was very excited to see this question on the list is because, taking in a little bit of a different direction, and I could speak personally about this, is that very often when these things come up, when I get into a rut, so we tend to feel like we are the only one experiencing that issue, that problem, which translates into there's something wrong with me, right? I can't keep it together. I can't keep my starm. I can't learn. I am just not into it. I'm not feeling it. It must be something is wrong with me, and I label myself. And the beauty of sharing this question and hearing all the various perspectives from the Rabbanim, and hearing, and again, even getting that, I told the person who texted me today, I told him, this text gives me a lot of chizuk, because it's something that we all experience. Every single person has ups and downs. We all are feeling it and not feeling it. And again, the question of how you get out of that is one thing, but I think half the battle is realizing that we're not alone in the battle, in that everybody experiences this from one time to another. And if once we realize that, so it lessens that pressure and that tendency to label ourselves, which in a sense, gives us that strength to ultimately overcome it and give all of our energies and our focus to doing that, as opposed to thinking about all the other things that are focused on negativity. And
if I could add on just to the coattails of the Chash Rabbanim, the importance of having teaching being a motivator is something that is definitely true, and we all have someone that we could teach, as Rabbi Wolanter and Rabbi Gopolsky mentioned. In fact, I heard from Rabbi Ben Zion Cook, who is the Talmud Mufak. He's the closest student to Rabbi Yosef Shalom Eliashiv Zatzal, where I once asked him about this question. I asked him about setting aside time for learning, and he said, "Well, do you teach?" I said, "Yes, that's it's what I do all the time as I'm teaching." So he said, "Well, that's your learning." I said, "What do you mean? Don't I have to make sure that I am pushing myself further and further?" He said, "Yeah, do it in your teaching." He said, "That's what Rav Eliashiv did." He said that Rav Eliashiv is famous for the fact that he would sit for 18 hours a day for probably more than 80 years of his life, 18 hours a day, nonstop learning, would stop to answer a question that someone would pose to him, to attend a bris milah, a wedding, but would 18 hours a day, for generally speaking, sit and just learn Torah. And Rabbi Zion Cook said he saw it, that what he was learning was what he was preparing to teach. And that's how he became the greatest Torah scholar. It is definitely a motivator. Another thing that was mentioned as well is that obligating yourself to a certain amount of time, even if it's just 15 minutes a day, is something that is also a tremendous motivator. Something that I've heard from Gedolei Yisrael have told me to make sure that I don't go to sleep each night until I make sure that I've learned for 15 minutes a day. That is definitely true. But I think that a great takeaway to take away from this question and all the different answers is that we have to be honest with ourselves, because each and every one of us are different. And we just heard a lot of different perspectives to address this question. I think it's important for us to look inward to figure out which one of these suggestions speaks most to us, because I think that they could all be effective and that could help each and every one of us grow in our learning. So it's important to take a look inward to figure out which one of these perspectives I could run with and apply to myself to make the most out of my learning.
Thank you. We are now going to shift gears, and you'll see what I mean in just a minute with the next question. Child care centers and preschools are opening here in California. My spouse and I have different feelings and opinions of sending our child to daycare / preschool under the current conditions. What should we do? Again, I open the floor.
This could be looked at, of course, on a level of what we call a shalom bias question that the parents are not, they typically, see. I mean, if someone was, the question is it strictly a medical question? Is it just of a feeling? We don't feel right. So obviously, we'd have to flush out, in a sense, what is the concern? Is there a medical concern? Are we not sure if the protocols will be filled? If the question boils down to the fact that everything is safe and there would be no reason not to send, well, then it's more of a fear than of a reality. And then I think that the two people, whether the spouses, have to figure out that they are just of different mindsets. That one puts more weight on safety, and even though it's safe, we want to be more careful. We don't want that to happen. I mean, you could have the same question where, at what age should we allow our child to cross the street by themselves? So one spouse may say, well, I feel if they're 10 years old. 10 years old, we can't let them cross till they're 18. You know what I'm saying? You have that, at what point? So I think that it's, I don't know if I'm dodging the question per se, but when you do have this question, some of the background needs to be checked out. At the end of the day, some of the backlog is that if the child does not go to school, and I'm not saying this is a reason to send them per se, but if the child is not going to go to school, and both parents have to go to work, for example, who's going to stay home? So I think that is also opens up another whole side of the question as to what to do with that. So that's I think the question needs a little more. A little more understanding to the background of the people, and just to say, well, if there's a discussion, always listen to the wife. You know what I'm saying?
If I could add to that, again, as any situation of shalom bias like this, it's a complicated issue, and it's actually a good opportunity, in a sense, to kind of reassess conflict resolution in the marriage in general. This is a great situation where you're at a crossroads. You're at a standstill in terms of who's going to get what they want. Only one party here can get what they want. Either we do send or we don't send, right? So the truth is, in these situations, it's very, very practical and recommended. And this, again, as Rabbi Bogovolsky pointed out, this is potentially a medical issue. So if both couples were to come together and say, let's ask a trusted third party, the pediatrician, for example, and make an agreement that whatever the pediatrician says, even if it's against my position, again, if we're asking an objective question, whatever the pediatrician says, that's what we're going to go with. If the pediatrician says it's safe, then okay, and then we both agree that it's safe. If not, so we're going to ask an expert instead of getting our tensions, more and more built up and fired up, going back and forth and running over the same points. Let's get a third outside perspective to answer our question. But in truth, usually there is more to it than that, and that's really where you get to kind of level 2, and that is, what are the needs that are being felt here? What is behind these issues? Why does one side want the child to go to daycare, and why does one side not want? And when you get to the why as opposed to the what, then it gets much easier to mediate because you can figure out maybe there's a way to satisfy both positions. Again, it's not going to be on the main issue of if the child can either go or not go, but perhaps if the reason why the parent wants the child to go is because they need a break, well, then maybe that's a different discussion of how can I give you more space that you can take care of what you need to do while I am watching the child at home. If it's a social issue, well, then you can take it in that direction. But coupling those two ideas together, getting an objective third approach that we're going to both listen to, whether it's a doctor in this case or a Rav in other cases, and then getting behind the issue to more of the why and the emotion behind it versus just the what, where we get stuck, that can be a very helpful approach to this issue and other conflicts in marriage in general. Any other thoughts on the floor? Okay, so then if that's the case, then we'll move on to another similar question, also in the realm of shalom bayis, in the realm of COVID-19. We are on the cusp of starting up a minyan in our shul, maybe, as per the rumors around. I have little kids at home, and I want to go to the Daven with a minyan, and my wife wants me to go as well. Sounds great, but she wants some free time for herself as well. But when should I be doing my job? Again, a question of how to balance, going to minyan versus giving everyone their space and their time. Well, how would the Rabbanim address this predicament?
The questioner is assuming. How did the questioner's spouse figure out that minyan is a free time? How'd they figure that out?
Well, that could be the question. That could be the old joke, right? The old joke is why was Yaakov besaking Mariv? Avraham set up Shacharis, Yitzchak set up Mincha. Why did Yaakov set up Mariv? Because you'd also want to get out of the house if you had 12 kids to put to bed, right? So putting that aside, that's the assumption of the question. I leave the answer to the assumption to the Rabbanim.
It's not really a Corona question. It's a question in general that every family has to navigate through. The place, I think the place you have to start with that, and I know that everybody's going to have something to say about this. So I'll just throw out the first ball on this. That the place you have to start is the understanding that going to minyan is not that's not an optional thing. Going to minyan is something that's obligatory. Now, a lot of times in a marriage, husband has a hard time establishing that this is something that is obligatory because he's not so careful about going to minyan. He'll go arbitrary times, go arbitrary days. So once he does that, so then it shows that he's not really so connected to it. And if he's not really so connected to it, if there are things that are going on in the house, and what are you going to minyan for? So the first has to be established that it's, that this is something that a person feels is an obligatory thing, and taka not just a great escape from the home. And if that's the case, so then it's not like, I get one, now you get one. I get to go out of the house for minyan. Well, now we're going to have to figure out a way for you to get out of things also. The reality has to be that going to minyan is like going to work. It's not a break. That's the first thing. Second thing is that it needs to also be established that so that's like going to work, and then every family has to figure out in the dynamic of their family as to exactly what, who does what's going to, what is each person's responsibility, and then figure out how everybody gets their free time. Davening is not free time. Davening is not off time. And if it is off time, then there's a problem, right? Just because you happen to meet a couple of people in shul and say hello to them, which, by the way, when we go back when the shuls go back, you ain't going to be doing that, right? It's not going to be a social experience anymore. It's going to be strictly a davening experience, in and out, like in and out burgers. It's going to be in and out tefillah. Right? You go in, you daven, you're out of there. So it's not going to be a big social experience, and it's not meant to be a big social experience. It's certainly not during the week, in the sense that we have a job to do, and our job to do is davening. Okay, so now we have to figure out where do we each get our breaks? Where does the husband get his break? Where does the wife get a break? But that's normal dynamics in a family. It's the normal things. So the question is a great question, but it just brings up really more of the same of the previous question, which is the dynamics in a family and what are healthy dynamics in a family. And it can't be, again, davening is not part of that negotiation that, well, you get that free time, so I now need to have free time. It's not free time. That's like going to work. It's an obligatory thing. And I think one other very important thing to recognize is somebody in the family has to daven for the family. The way that our halacha is structured and our Jewish life is structured, it's the man that has that obligation to responsibility to daven for his family. Again, it's not like an optional kind of thing. He's got a responsibility to daven for his family. When a man walks out of the house, what his wife should be saying to him is, daven well, because you're davening for us. You're not just davening for you. It's not just something you're doing for yourself. You're davening for us, and that we need your davening. Changes the whole perspective of things and changes the whole dynamic of things. But again, all of this is part of the normal dynamic of figuring out how a family operates, who does what.
I'll 100%. And like you said, that the last end is that when the husband is davening, he's davening for the family. Someone has to do the job. I think that if the perspective of the wife is that it is just a man's time out, just to get away, of course I would be against it. In fact, if I was the wife, if I was the woman, knowing that my husband did not do the job that he was supposed to be doing, he shouldn't be going at all. If he's going to waste that time, and I would say, yeah, if you're not going to do it, I mean, he still has an obligation regardless, but she feels she's being robbed of her chelek, of her portion of her messenger doing what he's supposed to be doing. And then on the other hand, I think just to flip it, maybe as an obligation, I think a husband who really understands and appreciates his wife's role in the family and taking care of children and being that keres habayis and being the one that's really burdening, shouldering the burden of the children, the same way that she is willing to sacrifice some precious time for the both of them, so too for her menuchas hanefesh, for her, for her being sane, he will also carve out some time, because he wants to carve out the time for her, because he knows that when she gets that time for herself, and by the way, that time could be her davening as well. It doesn't have to be that she goes to Nordstrom. It can be that she's also going to take time to daven for her own personal, she wants to say something to him. She needs her own personal time, and he'll appreciate that. He'll do it for her as well. So that's really the give and take. And that creates, by the way, if we have a relationship like that, that will truly, truly bring a sense of shalom bayis to this couple. And the children will respect it so much to see that mommy and daddy, Abba and Ima, Tati and mommy, they give each other, they love each other so much, as we're all very familiar with the term of love, of Abba, to give, the Hava is to give. They're giving of themselves the time, but it's not just for them, because as you know, the more you give, the more you get. So that's what they're doing. They're each giving of themselves to get for the bigger, larger picture.
Beautiful. But I just wanted to add in one thing. I'm not sure what the question was. When does she get her free time? She gets her free time when he goes to shul. That's her free time. Good. One of the kids is out of the house. Well, the biggest kid is out of the house. Oh, Baruch Hashem.
Thank you. Moving on. The president said houses of worship this past Friday. The president has said houses of worship are essential and should be opened immediately. But the governor of California in particular, has still said no up till now. Well, until today, eventually. Question is still a general question. So you have a question of federal versus state law. Must we still follow the governor? And if we are concerned about Chilul Hashem and what the non-Jews would say. And as a follow-up to that, and again, this is a general question about Chilul Hashem, we've seen in the news that many churches are demonstrating as well and defying the laws of closing. So if that is the case, would it still be a Chilul Hashem for us to join with them in their demonstrations to open our houses of worship?
If I could jump into to that question as really just a way to frame it, a little bit more, and then I'm sure the more senior Rabbanim will have what to add. We know the Jewish people are the Am HaNivchar. We are the chosen nation. We are about to celebrate the anniversary of when we received the Torah that was the culmination of our existence as a people, to live Kuchabrichu Yisrael V'Oraisa Chadhu, to live God, the Jewish people, and the Torah all as one. And we are the chosen nation. But what does that mean that we were the chosen nation? What is that supposed to motivate us to do or not to do? What are we supposed to do with this great, it seems like, responsibility that we are the quote-unquote chosen nation? So I've heard from Rav Shechter many times that what it means to be the Am HaNivchar, he quotes from the Ramban, he said many times that it means that we have to be the Or LaGoyim, is that we have to be the light onto the nations that are supposed to model the proper way to function. That when we as a people act a certain way, that even when an individual acts a certain way, being that they are part of the Jewish people, they are a walking billboard and advertisement, speaking really for the entire people, and therefore every single public display that we do needs to be weighed accordingly, especially when it's done as a group, because we need to be the Or LaGoyim, and particularly with regard to this issue, which has people across the spectrum, people that think that it was ridiculous that anything should have closed down in the first place, to people thinking that we should be closed until for God knows how long, until there's
65. You got up one.
So we have to make sure that even though there are all these different perspectives, that we are able to continue to be that Or LaGoyim. So in especially in these times where there are all these different perspectives, we have to be super careful and weighty in how we function, which is why we're going to be extra cautious when it comes to our reopening, whenever that may be, and hopefully, as Rabbi Danziger mentioned, hopefully that is going to be relatively soon. But also with keeping in mind this idea of being the Or LaGoyim. But that's just a hakdama. That's just an introduction to, I'm sure, more insights from the Rabbanim, and I pass the ball.
I'll just say quickly, there is just general laws that there are federal laws, state laws. We know that, for example, marijuana is a federal offense. It's illegal according to the federal courts. Statewide, every state does something different, and some are allowed, some are not allowed. So, there's a whole Torah, when it comes to the laws of to the laws of America and how that works. Be that as it may, I think we always follow the more central location where we are. We don't necessarily look at what other people are doing per se. but it's something more where it's more localized to what we need to do. And I think that we as the Jewish people, even though there are many churches and organizations that are demonstrating, and we could easily be a part of them, I always feel that when there would be some type of a backlash, somehow they'll fish us out of the water, just to say, oh, look at the Jews, they're doing something that they shouldn't do. Just personally, I'm very, very sensitive to the fact about the neighbors around, that we should be doing something wrong, and we're really in their eye. We don't need to give them any reason to find something wrong that we're doing.
Okay. We'll go through anything. Wanna move on? Okay. So moving on, another question. I received a refund from my car insurance company for a decrease in my driving due to the pandemic. Should I have to pay tuition for this time period? Meaning making the connection between driving less versus going to school less, for children going to school less. If yes, if yes, I do need to pay my tuition. Well, what about at least a reduction in things that the school does not have to provide, like paper towels, electricity, maintenance, because these things are simply not happening right now with no one on campus. Should there be a tuition reduction? Do we have a right to a tuition reduction? Question mark.
I'll just say first that I think there are a lot of different ideas. I think there's a lot of, I don't know if there's a final psaka from any of the Gedolim, but I would say that, first of all, one should approach the institutions that they are dealing with. I know it's a person doesn't budget, a school, for example, doesn't budget, we're paying, per child, 30 cents, 50 cents for paper towels, for the year, and especially it's not a whole year, it's only a few months. And nevertheless, you could say that it's a total package about tuition. It goes a whole year. I think in general, the overall approach and address is that we need to continue to maintain the schools and paying what we need to pay, because ultimately, if we don't pay now, they won't exist in the future when we need them. So it might be a very minuscule amount. If it's a halachic question, am I entitled to that small amount? Al pi halacha, you may be entitled to it. I would ask the school for it, for whatever, how you calculate that to be. But if that is the question, that it's that amount, then ask them for that back. If they disagree, they don't want to give it back, maybe go to a din Torah for that amount. I know it's kedai, and it's worth it, but one could do so. I think of the general tuition a person is obligated to pay. If they have trouble paying for it for their own financial reasons, that they themselves are out of work, they were furloughed, and so on and so forth, they should make some type of furlough payment. They can say, listen, I can't pay now, I'll pay over the future time. I can't pay, I'll pay over the next 10 years this amount that I was short for this time period.
I can just
You
go ahead. Okay, just on that note, a similar note was that I was I'm on a WhatsApp group of questions and answers center of Mordechai Willing, and he's getting really questions from all over the world, from every community, really a large chunk of the community on his shoulders. And one question, he was asked a very similar question to this. And one of the a lot of the answers to these questions are genius, and they're very, very, a lot of them are innovative. But when he was asked a question about this, the answer that he gave was, I can't paskin a din Torah without both parties in front of me. And I think, again, just the perspective, when we ask these questions, we like to think about these things, and it's important. And maybe we should, again, it's a question. But that being said, when these questions come up, just the perspective should be that to have a din Torah with only one of the parties present is not the norm, and I think the idea behind that, more than just the technicality of having two people in the room, is, as Rabbi Wolgopolsky was pointing out, that there are, in a sense, two sides to every story, which requires really looking into and discussion as to perhaps there are other costs that we just don't know about. And as Rabbi Wolgopolsky said, what are those costs that I'm asking for? Should I get all the costs for my, all the costs that the schools are saving? That should come to me, or it should be split out, So the point, I think, being that these questions should be handled, it's easy to throw them out, but when actually thought about and approached, it's a very serious thing to approach a din Torah when it comes to dinei mamanos, monetary law, and it should be approached as such.
So I'll say a few things. The first is that it's very interesting that there is precedent in halacha for these questions. That these are questions that have been asked before. When I say before, not in our generation, in previous generations, they've dealt with this during similar kinds of things, of outbreaks and sicknesses where tuitions weren't able to, where schools were closed, where things were closed down. Very fascinating that there is a history on these. There is amongst the poskim. There is I believe a general understanding that tuition, and again, this is only general, it's not specific cases, it's not the din Torah cases, and it's just the rule of thumb that tuitions continue to be paid, because our institutions need to continue and they need to be supported through this. Nevertheless, if there are specific programs that are not being provided, and the specific programs have a dollar amount to them, so then that we wouldn't necessarily be obligated to pay for those. There is a difference between schools and preschools. Not the place now to go into all the details of the halacha. Ask your rabbis, the fascinating halachas, but they do draw a distinction between schools and preschools, and to what the obligations are for the tuitions. Teachers, most poskim say that must continue to be paid, especially if they're continuing to teach. But I want to walk away from the halacha for 1 second and just give us, I think in this question, everybody has to be thinking of, at the end of the day, the incredible heroes that are our teachers, and the people that are really carrying an incredible burden. Look, some of us here, and I can see a few of the screens, know what it is to teach, and teaching is a challenge. It's great. It's a great profession, but it's a challenge. Teaching under these circumstances is a challenge on steroids. I mean, it's an incredibly difficult challenge. And the fact that our teachers have continued to do this and continued to teach and continued to run classes. My daughter calls me. My daughter is a teacher in a special needs school in Lakewood, New Jersey, and dealing with autistic children, very, very difficult situations. And she's a preschool teacher, so she's dealing with very, very young kids. She calls me and she's panting. She's panting. I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "I just taught." I said, "How long did you?" "I taught for an hour." I said, "What are you panting for?" She said, "I've never moved so much in my life." Because in a classroom, it's a different style of teaching. Here you're entertaining on the Zoom to kids with special needs. And she said she's never worked so hard in her life between preparation and between teaching. And then I think we have to just keep this in our heads, that we shouldn't be asking how we can get away with not paying our teachers. We should be asking, well, what more can we do for our teachers that they continue to support our kids and continue to teach our kids during this time is really something, one of like the shining stars, one of the beautiful things that we get out of this whole thing. Just my 2 cents.
Thank you. And just one final question before we open to the floor. Put it away. There's a late edition. It's a question many have been asking, not just in our community, but communities really worldwide. People are talking about COVID-19 being a sign for Mashiach. Is that true? What do we do with that if it is or if it isn't? And if not, what can I do to bring Mashiach during this time?
Okay, I'll jump in. Is it a sign for Mashiach? Everything is a sign for Mashiach. Everything that happens to us is another footstep. It's another step closer to Mashiach. Is this? Somebody said to me recently, I'm so disappointed. Mashiach didn't come. Yeah, but that disappointment is every single day. That disappointment has to be constant. This, what we're going through, is certainly, without a question, is a challenge to Klal Yisrael. There's no question about it. The Gemara says, and this is a difficult point, but the Gemara says, "Ein Puranas Bala Olam," that difficult things come to the world, Ela B'Shvil Yisrael, for the Jewish people. That ultimately it's all a message. Rav Beryl Wein said it so magnificently and beautifully. He said, you imagine somebody goes to a town and there's a person in town that's speaking, and they're the only person that speaks Yiddish. And the person, there's 1,000 people gathered at some gathering, and the speaker stands up and the speaker starts to speak Yiddish. So you look at it and say, who's he speaking to? Nobody else in the town understands Yiddish. Oh, you realize he must be talking to me. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu talks in the world, he could be talking in China, he could be talking in faraway places. But when he's speaking Yiddish, he's talking to us. When things happen in the world, when the world moves in the way that it did, shifts, these massive shifts that took place over the past few months, these incredible poundings that the world took in the past few months, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was speaking to us in Yiddish. And it was a message to the Jewish people. What that message is, that's up for grabs. That doesn't make a difference. But that it was a message to the Jewish people, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is speaking to us. Message does not mean punishment. Message means message. And is that part of the footsteps of Mashiach? It's part of the footsteps of Mashiach. Every single shift, every single thing that happens in our lives in this world is part of the footsteps of Mashiach. And we have to look at it that way. Is it going to be tomorrow? Is it going to be the next day? It's anybody's guess. We have no idea. We believe it's going to be now. But at the end of the day, we have no idea. And therefore, we look at every single thing as being that next step towards Mashiach. And that even though this might not have been the one, he might not be coming from this, but nevertheless, this is part of that whole system, part of that whole walk and march towards Mashiach. And that's the way we have to look at it. What can I do to bring Mashiach? Nothing different than what I could have done 3 months ago. Nothing different than what I'm going to have to do in 3 months. What do I need to do to bring Mashiach? What I need to do is stop focusing on bringing Mashiach, focusing on becoming a wonderful person, focusing on becoming the best Jew you can be and the best human being you can be. And that's our task and our job in this world. Will that bring Mashiach? Yes. But what is our focus? Our focus is to take the beautiful neshamas that God gave us and to turn them into the most beautiful neshamas that they could be. My 2 cents.
I'd just like to add, if it's, the question was asked that if it is true that this was the son of Mashiach, then I'll tell everyone to pack your bags. I'll announce that they are starting to fly on Sunday, and buy your tickets. I'm not so sure if my
make aliyah.
Make aliyah, right? Not my viewpoint of every certain events that are a sign that Mashiach is coming. We shouldn't look at these signs as Mashiach. As we know, the Rambam says, as in Shlosh Ikarim, that every single day Mashiach can come without anything happening. We don't need a great sign. We don't need something fantastic, good or bad, for it to happen. Nevertheless, I think that if Mashiach didn't come as of yet, as a result of this, and it's a scary thought that we see that we are now segueing back into what we would call normal life as we know it, and going back to things, albeit with changes, masks, and other things like that, and Mashiach has not come. I think what we need to do as a result of this is to at least take all of the lessons that we've learned, all of the shiurim, all of the things that we've taken upon ourselves, all the davenings that we've had by ourselves, the learning that we've done, all the things that were different during this period of time because of the events, to make it something that has a purpose and something that's worthwhile to take on to go further. Because if we just slip back to everything the way it was before and have not grown from the experience that we endured these last 2 to 3, 4 months, then it's been a total waste. But ultimately, when we change, we do these things, and hopefully we'll be able to do that, that will ultimately be something towards the goal of the future of Mashiach to come.
Just
I
again,
want to tap that. I just want to tap that off, if you don't mind. Just want to tap that off. Rabbi Polsky, thank you. Beautiful. An exercise over Shavuos, because sometime soon this thing is we're going to be climbing back to normal. An exercise to do over Shavuos is to ask yourself. Every person should ask themselves the question: what are 3 things that I learned inside my home, locked up inside of my house? 3 things that I learned that I can live without or live differently and carry with me when those doors open. So that this whole experience wasn't just an experience that we remember as something that happened in the past, but it's something that all the yield that this had, all the stuff that we learned from it, that we can carry with us, so that we don't just slide back to who we were. We actually emerge from this thing as different people. And I'm saying it as a homework assignment. Do it over Shavuos. At one of your meals on Shavuos, forget about the milchiks. That's much less important. What's much more important is that the meals be meaningful and that Shavuos be meaningful. One great way to make Shavuos meaningful is to have this discussion with your families. Have this discussion with yourself. What are 3 things, and my number is arbitrary, but what are 3 things that we can continue to do that we've learned from this? 3 things that changed our lives that we can institute in our lives now to make and enhance our lives and make us different, better people when we get out the other side.
And just to add again, it's whenever there's a first of all, thank you for both those excellent answers. Just to add to that as well, whenever there's one of these heightened situations where there are murmurs and people are giving different segulas and saying this is Mashiach, that is Mashiach, there's always the risk of people becoming disillusioned towards that Ani Mamin, towards that of the Ikari Amuna, that Mashiach is, as Hashem will come, at its time, and we shouldn't give up hope. Again, whether this is or this is not, as the Rabbanim pointed out, is in a sense irrelevant. But we shouldn't, if you did believe that Mashiach was going to come from this, don't give up hope that Mashiach can still come from this. Again, whether he does or doesn't, but the level of our Emunah and that Ani Mamin should not be affected one iota by this situation one way or another.
Yeah. And well said, Rabbi Danziger. And of course, what Rabbi Wogelanter, Rabbi Rapolsky were saying is 100% true. That the Rambam says exactly like Rabbi Rapolsky had mentioned, that we have to believe in Mashiach. That he's going to come today, like the Briskerov said. That my belief that Mashiach is going to come is not that he's going to come tomorrow or next week or he's going to come right now. And that's something that I need to believe. And as Rabbi Wogelanter said, so beautifully, that it's more that we have to focus on how I can better myself, and how I could be a better Jew and really a better human being overall. And when I before we end, I'm going to add one more comment to this question, and then we're going to shift into we'll have time for a couple of questions. The hour is already getting late. If anyone had, 1 or 2 questions we could address, you could write it into the chat, and I'll let Rabbi Danziger pick his favorite one to address, 1 or 2, and then we'll close this amazing event. But the Maharal Miprag, he addresses that we know that our rabbis teach us that anyone who does not misabel, anyone that does not mourn over the destruction of Yerushalayim, over the destruction of the temple, so then they are not going to be able to see Jerusalem in its rebuilt state. And we know that there has to be disappointment that we have to be feeling every time that we go through a day and Mashiach did not come that day. And it's a day that we have to re-examine our actions to see how can I better myself for that eventuality. But the Maharal says that the whole concept that we're not going to experience Mashiach, when he actually does come, if we did not mourn accordingly, is very strange. Because what does that mean? Especially in today's world, that everything, we live in such a flat world, in such a small world, where, what do you mean? I'm not going to hear Mashiach is coming. I'm going to get a push notification on my phone from 14 different WhatsApp groups that I'm in. Twitter is going to be going tweeting off the rack, and Facebook is going to be blowing up. Because word's going to be out, the Mashiach is here, so what, I'm not going to hear about it, and therefore I'm not going to enjoy. I'm going to try and buy a ticket on El Al's website, and I'm going to be not allowed to purchase a ticket because I didn't properly mourn. How could that be? So the Maharal says that, no, you'll be able to go, and you'll be able to see everyone rejoicing, and you might feel a little happy yourself. But the true rejoicing is going to come from those that really pined over it, those that really were looking for it, those that really spent their time bettering themselves, being better people, better neighbors, better Jews, in order so that they could experience that eventuality. This coming together like we did this evening is to that point where we know that the destruction of the temple came from divides amongst Klal Yisrael, and creating a night like this, 4 rabbis, 2 shuls, 1 Torah, a sense of achdus amongst the community like this is the best way to bring Mashiach closer. When we have achdus like this, when we create camaraderie like this, especially through Torah and growing as one as we prepare for Yom Tov, there is no better way than I can think of. And just before we get to, if anyone had any last-minute questions, I just want to again thank Malka and Shalom Brookler for sponsoring the evening's learning in memory of Kitty Silverman and Alwyn Gordon. Their neshama should have an aliyah from all of the learning that we did, from the schus of all the learning. I want to thank each and every one of you for being a part of this. Thank the Rabbanim for being a part of this and giving such a rich conversation. And look forward to seeing everybody, God willing, tomorrow night at 8 o'clock for the Tikkun Leil Erev Shavuos from 8 to 11.
Maybe
just
you could
throw in- say it again.
explain what you like tomorrow.
So I'd like to just jump in for a second. To tomorrow night. First of all, it's beautiful tonight. Also, I want to. There's 64 boxes. Now I don't know. Many of you will remember the Brady Bunch. That they were the original box makers, right? Of this motif. So all I do is I look at something like this. There are 3 pages of people, and I say, "Brady Bunch, eat your heart out." This is really beautiful. How many people are here tonight? And tomorrow night, Mitzvah Hashem will double. What's going to happen tomorrow night is going to be like this. We're learning tomorrow night the 48 ways of wisdom. There are 48 ways to be Kona Torah. We're going to talk about this in great detail tomorrow night. 48, it's not like, take notes and pay attention and sit up straight. There are 48 ways of the corrections that have to be made, or strengthenings that have to be done inside of a person's character in order to be able to acquire wisdom. And they are 48 pieces of advice that have to do not only with sitting and learning Torah, but they have to do with friendships, they have to do with relationships, they have to do with shalom bayis, with peace in our homes, they have to do with success in our jobs. There are 48 pieces of wisdoms from the sages that will enhance every single aspect of our lives. The way we're going to do it tomorrow night is that we're going to print the Mishnah. It's probably going to be up on the side in the chat so that everybody can refer to it. And we're going to go through there. It's basically 48 phrases, phrases. And each rabbi is going to take one. We're going to go around in a round robin. Now, that's a good thing because we have about 3 hours, which, you look at that and you go, oh my God, 3 hours. Well, 3 hours is only like half a Shavuos night, so it's not really a big deal. But it's 3 hours. And it's 3 hours, 4 rabbis, 48 ways. I'm not really great at math, but I think that gives us about 4 minutes apiece. So you know that any one bit is not going to be any longer than 4 minutes. And if it's going to be longer than 4 minutes, then one of us is going to start screaming at the next guy because you're taking away my time. So they're going to be small, bite-sized ideas Now imagine getting 48 different, completely different subjects, 48 different bite-sized pieces of advice, which is the way that we should be teaching them, 48 different bite-sized pieces of advice of how to turn these ideas into practical parts of our lives. So it really could be a tremendous thing. One of the important thing is we have a principle in Judaism called Chaver d'Chaver Yislei. Everybody's got a friend. So here, everybody's got a friend. Tell your friends, drag people into this. We have the capacity, I think, to be able to have 300 people. We can have 300 boxes.
Yeah.
Right. We can have.
Do I need to up it to 1,000?
No. Let's shoot for 3. That's let's shoot for 1,000. But let's encourage other people to come tomorrow night. It's going to be a great program. It's going to be long, but it's meant to be long. It's Shavuos. It's preparing for Shavuos, and but by the way, it doesn't work this way. That if you stay up 3 hours tomorrow night, then you could take that off of the amount of time that you have to stay up on Shavuos. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. It's not a deposit in the bank, but it is a very good preparation for Shavuos. With that, I turn it back to Rabbi Danziger to field if there's. I don't see if there's any questions in the chat, but if anybody wants to pipe in with a question before we end, so then that's we'll take that.
I have one question here that came in. How do the rabbis envision our kilos will change in the long term as a result of having gone through this situation? As a clarification, will we continue to be through Zoom? Did we reach new people as a result? Are we going to move to obviously, in addition to an in-person model, have more of a digital model as well? In general, how will our kilos change in the long term as a result of this situation?
I think it will. I think that it's been a good, there are definitely challenges to it. It's a little draining, but some of the things that I've done, I think we'll probably continue. And and some things that when we do it, even when we get into be in person, you could, in addition to add the Zoom component as well. But ultimately, it's not the way it's supposed to be. Learning is supposed to be in person, supposed to be together. We should be able to, give a high five, give a yasher koyach, do, have a l'chaim together, and do things, really, really in person. So it definitely is as a b'diavad situation. I think Klal Yisrael has really done a lot during this time, and I think it could be an addition to things that we automatically do. It should, in my opinion, should not replace any things that we can definitely do in person. And the Bible want to say about Rabbi Vogelanter, those 3 hours for tomorrow night, you can. No, so from 2 to 5 a.m., you go to sleep, those are your 3 hours, not the hours from 9 to 2, but from 2 to 5 a.m., you design your 3 hours.
So I want to throw in something on this question. You remember the Alpo dog commercials, the Alpo food? And so the dog would come out and he would run over to the Alpo bowl and he would with gusto, he would eat that whole bowl. And you say, the announcer would say, you see how much dogs love Alpo. Well, of course they love Alpo. It's been starved for 6 weeks. So of course you put an Alpo bowl, you could have put anything in front of him. You could have put tuna fish in front of him. He would have eaten it because he was starved. When we walk into shul, there's going to be a certain sense of being starved. And I can tell you this from experience, because here in Eretz Yisrael, shuls opened 2 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, we were davening outside in Minyanim, and then just last week, the very end of last week, shuls themselves opened, and we're back inside the shul. We're not in the main shul upstairs; we're in the basement. But nevertheless, we're back into shul, and I can tell you that I'm looking around and I'm seeing that there are some people. And the more important part of this question is not how it's changed things for digital versus in person. The more important thing is that what does it do to our relationship to shul? When you get something taken away from you, you can appreciate it even greater. And I think that when we walk back into our shuls, that day that we walk back into shuls, I think we have to, from the first step that we take back into our shuls, even if it's into the outside, into the parking lot, but that from that first day, we have to look at it and say, okay, how is this now going to be different? it's going to be in person. I'm going to be davening with people. All of that is going to be the same, and I'm going to be outside, so it's going to be weird. But how is my attitude to shul going to be different? How is my attitude to tefillah going to be different? How is my attitude to my rabbi going to be different? How is my attitude to my other congregants going to be different? How am I going to be a different person in the context of shul? And that's I think, again, front and foremost in our minds, whether we're going to have more Zoom classes, less Zoom classes, Zoom this, Zoom that, all that's very important. And it's good discussions to have, but it's not the ikr, it's not the main. The main thing is, how am I going to make my experience in shul different, and how am I going to be a different person inside of that shul? Is my phone going to be one of my accessories that I'm going to bring into shul, or now am I going to use this to reset and leave my phone home? Am I going to stop talking in shul? Am I going to stop doing some of the things that I've done that are not productive to my davening in shul? Those are the kinds of questions that we need to be asking, and the kinds of things we need to be addressing. What kind of changes are we making? Zoom, non-Zoom? Yeah, okay, shkoyach. We'll worry about it. But the real change, am I going to be a different person inside of shul? Can I be a different person inside of shul? And can our shuls take now a leap that we almost could never have made? We have an opportunity here to mamish make new shuls, new communities, new alignments. We can bring new atmosphere into our shuls. And that's an opportunity that we need to grab onto. The excitement about the fact that the shul is opening is not that I can get back to business as usual. The excitement is that I can get back to the new business, and I can make that new business into something amazing. My 2 cents.
So that's I didn't get any last second questions before we close up. That was the only question I received on the chat.
I'm going to unmute everybody so everyone can give each other shalom aleichem, and see you tomorrow night.
Rabbi, no shaking hands. No shaking hands.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
Everyone. It's wonderful to see everybody.
Thank you.
So nice to see everyone.
Thank you.
Be here. Laila tov.
See everyone tomorrow. Everyone tomorrow.
Guys.
8 o'clock.
Everybody's leaving before Kiddush.
Can we make this services slower so that we can appreciate?
So tomorrow night is bring your own cheesecake for the Tikkun Shavuos, by the way.
And a lot